While there's been much discussion concerning the impact of policing on Black lives, less attention has been paid to the specific ways the ability for Black mothers to care and nurture their children has been impacted and negotiated within the carceral state. Policing plays a critical role in shaping perceptions of Black motherhood, who is allowed to be a good mother, and the specific ways mothers are allowed to operate. Through this project, I analyzed videos of police interactions with Black mothers in order to discern how motherhood is defined, negotiated, and imagined in these encounters. The videos in my collection range from direct harassment of Black mothers to the brutalization of their children. In each video, Black mothers express concern for their children, who are either witnesses or participants in the encounter. And my analysis, which is shaped by Black feminist and critical race theory, seeks to explore when, where, and if these concerns are acknowledged by the police. And also, just as a heads up, I'm not going to actually show videos just because of time constraints. I'm going to be showing images, but there's links to videos if you would like to see. So my guiding research questions are: how are aggrieved mothers constructed through police encounters? How do officers respond to Black mothers' aggrievement? And what are the consequences for mothers who are not seen as aggrieved? And through my observation, which I will expand upon throughout this presentation, I ascertained that the role of the aggrieved mother provides an opening for Black women to challenge their provisional status. But the actions of police officers determine whether Black women will be successful in assuming this role. I also suggest that Elijah Anderson's conception of the iconic ghetto serves as a discursive space for Black mothers, and that, as a result, they are not afforded the ability to be aggrieved and are, in turn, punished. So what does it mean to be aggrieved? In American Hiatus, Ruby C. Tapia provides a framework for interpreting how good mothering is evoked in relation to patriarchy and nationalism. Tapia explores the concept of the maternal melodrama, in which mothers whose sorrow aligns with patriotic functions are able to assume the role of sympathetic moral victims, casting their suffering as legitimate. She recounts the story of the 9/11 widows, 31 pregnant women who, according to Tapia, were the ideal moral victims due to their role as heterosexual mothers and wives. Their suffering and grief was not only legitimized, but subsumed by the nationalist project, inciting rage and providing irrefutable evidence for the necessities of war. However, the ability to be an aggrieved mother is temporaneous and conditional. According to Tapia, mothers who do not adhere to nationalist scripts and reproductive desires that buttress the nation are deemed unruly subjects and are not afforded the capacity to ground their sorrow as a product of their maternal roles. Tapia's analysis focused on the 9/11 widows who protested the deaths of their husbands and questioned the state's fear-mongering response. As a consequence, these women were depicted as unpatriotic and aggressive attention whores. Of this occurrence, Tapia states, quote, "Indeed, where the unruliness of gender, race, sexuality, and class cannot be reined in by an avenging, sentimental, patriotic framing, the span of the beloved mother's shadow diminishes, and the variety of maternal bodies it can contain dwindles." While Tapia's assessment was limited almost solely to white mothers, Black mothers also embodied aggrieved motherhood, but their ability to do so is shaped differently due to what Elijah Anderson deems their provisional status, which situates them as inherently criminal. Unlike the primarily white woman Tapia refers to, Black women's reproductive capabilities are already considered antithetical to the state, situating them as inherently unruly. According to Patricia Hill Collins, the symbol of the matriarch serves as a controlling image for Black women and their perceived failure at motherhood, in which they are portrayed as overly aggressive, emasculating, and incapable of supervising their children. Expressing a similar observation as Hill Collins, Elijah Anderson states, quote, "The Black woman with children in tow might be perceived as loud and boisterous, seemingly unfeminine yet sexualized, or bestial than human," end quote. Due to Black mothers' inherent categorization as unruly subjects, they are not afforded the fallen from grace script that the 9/11 mothers embody. However, this is not to say that Black mothers are wholly incapable of being seen as aggrieved. For Black mothers, the association of the maternal melodrama with characteristics such as caring, docile, and virtuous provide an opportunity for Black women to challenge their provisional status. Mauricio Nohero cites the mothers of the movement to provide an analysis of how the maternal melodrama can be evoked to dispel the provisional status Black women are subjected to. Similar to the 9/11 widows Tapia refers to, the mothers of the movement have also received a national platform and have been able to evoke maternal melodrama in order to challenge the demonization of their children, as well as situate their children as victims worthy of empathy. However, the ability of the mothers of the movement to be regarded as aggrieved is tenuous at best. While they've been celebrated in some circles, they have also been heavily demonized and characterized as bad mothers who breed criminals. An article published by USA Today, Ron Hosko of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund blamed the grieving mothers for the deaths of not only their own children, but for all Black lives. In the article, he quoted Dallas Police Chief David Brown, who, arguing that the police were tasked with way too much, he stated, 70% of the African American community is being raised by single women. Let's give it to the cops to solve that as well. An analysis of how space constructs motherhood can provide an important framework for understanding how Black women are denied the ability to be aggrieved mothers. Marcia Marotta develops the concept of mother space to encapsulate understandings of good mothers that are defined not only by who is parenting and the ways in which it is done, but the spaces both mothers and their children inhabit. Her conceptualization of discursive spaces is most useful for my project. Discursive spaces are not bounded or visible like material spaces. Instead, they are consistently evolving in response to power relations and current normative expectations. Elijah Anderson provides an important analysis of discursive spaces by interjecting a more nuanced understanding of how Blackness and place are intricately connected and how the ghetto and stereotypical perceptions of it exist as both a temporal and corporal space that is always mapped onto Black bodies, no matter where they are located. He states, quote, "The iconic ghetto is a point of reference for any and all Blacks who appear in predominantly white settings, especially when incidents of crime permeate this bubble." The idea of the iconic ghetto can transform Marotta's conception of maternal spaces and Tapia's maternal melodrama to incorporate how Black motherhood is constructed and negotiated within the context of policing, in which Black mothers are already presumed to be criminally suspect, either for their own actions and behaviors or for those of their children. Aggressive over-policing, surveillance, and the provisional status of Black mothers severely inhibits their ability to, as Tapia states, ground their struggles around the maternal figure. In my analysis, I identified a process through which aggrieved Black motherhood is constructed and contested during police encounters. The first step entails Black mothers' appeals to aggrieved motherhood, which is either dismissed by police or recast by officers as a nuisance or deviant. The failure to be seen as aggrieved results in punishment of Black mothers and often their children as well. My methodological approach of video analysis allows me to situate my work within what Ariella Azule deems a visual spatial essay. Similar to Azule, who utilizes photographs of demolished homes to depict the damage inflicted by the Israeli regime upon Palestinian spaces, both private and public, I would like to situate videos depicting police brutality upon Black mothers as evidence of the damage state surveillance and brute violence inflicts upon familial ties, which is a hindrance to Black motherhood. This methodology attempts to observe the implications and ramifications of state domination and the damage it imposes upon Black bodies within state-controlled spaces. The first video I'll be discussing involved a violent arrest of a pregnant Black woman named Michelle. Officers were called to the scene by a white woman over an incident of road rage. The officer approaches Michelle and tells her that the woman who made the call claims that Michelle threw something at her car. Michelle evokes the maternal role when she states, "I had my daughter right there. My daughter was scared." She further states, "My second grader was scared." Through this exchange, Michelle's identity as a mother of a young girl and her expression of concern for the well-being of her child is evoked to dispel her categorization as angry, aggressive, and criminal. However, the encounter escalates. The officer asks Michelle for her name, and when she questions whether she has to legally provide this information, the officer tells her that she has 2 minutes to comply. But within 15 seconds, he has forcibly detained her. She yells for the officer not to touch her and explains that she is pregnant. The officers continue to detain and handcuff her. They then tackle her to the ground for resisting and drag her to the cop car. Michelle's attempts to assume the role of the aggrieved mother has failed, casting her as an unruly subject. Later in the interaction, the officer returns and says, "So you say you're pregnant?" To which Michelle replies in the affirmative. The officer then states, "Go ahead and cooperate, and then we don't have to get hands-on with you," thus situating Michelle's behavior as justification for the forceful arrest. She becomes solely responsible for the threat posed to her unborn child. I also analyzed a video depicting the violent arrest of Jacqueline Craig and her 2 teenage daughters in Fort Worth, Texas. An officer arrives to the scene and Craig tells him that their neighbor choked her young son. During the encounter, Jacqueline expresses concern for the well-being of her son and protests the physical harm he has experienced when she states, "You don't have the right to grab and choke nobody's son." The officer then responds by saying, "Why don't you teach your son not to litter?" Through this exchange, both Jacqueline and her son are relegated to provisional statuses. By asking Jacqueline why she doesn't teach her son not to litter, the police officer has characterized her son as inherently criminal. The officer's line of questioning also evokes the controlling image of the matriarch. The officer implies that Jacqueline's son's supposedly delinquent behavior, as evidenced by his possible littering, can be attributed to her poor parenting skills. What follows is a violent arrest of not only Jacqueline, but of her 15-year-old daughter as well, who the officer wrestles to the ground, handcuffs, and then threatens with a taser. In this moment, not only is Jacqueline punished for not being an aggrieved mother, but her children are as well. The third video analyzed depicts a black woman who is being forcibly questioned and detained inside of a store. When the video begins, the police officer is holding the woman by her arm and attempting to drag her outside. She consistently tells the officer that she does not want to leave with him because she does not trust him. During the counter, the woman states, "My kids are scared." The officer swiftly dismisses her claim by telling her that her children are not scared, thus foreclosing on the possibility of aggrievement and challenging the woman's ability to assess the welfare of her own children. Through this exchange, the officer has not only interpreted the woman's concern for her children as unwarranted, but also unjustified. The officer also characterized the woman's aggrievement as illegitimate. Later in the encounter, the woman asks why the officer will not let her go, to which she responds, "Because you're acting irrational." Similar to the case of Michelle, as discussed before, the forceful treatment this woman receives is also attributed to her behavior. Her reluctance to leave the store with the officer due to her concern for her children is rendered unwarranted and thus punishable. However, the actions and behaviors of this woman are interpreted differently by the police officer as compared to the treatment of Michelle. Instead of being labeled as uncooperative, as was the case with Michelle, this woman is labeled as irrational. This is a very gendered concept that has been used historically to delegitimize women's feelings. This caricature is forced onto the woman and is used to deny her attempt to assume the role of the aggrieved mother, resulting in her detainment as punishment. The fourth and final video I analyzed was filmed by an unidentified woman in Texas. When the recording begins, two officers are arresting a 14-year-old black boy while his mother records the encounter. The officers inform his mother that they are taking him into custody because he matched the description of a suspected burglar. The mother professes that she believes her son is innocent. As the officers turn to exit, the woman asks, "Can you tell me where you're taking my son before you leave?" The male officer turns back to her and states, "You've become uncooperative, so I'm not going to do that." With this response, the officer effectively recasts her concern for her son as unruly and disrespectful behavior. The woman continues to ask where they are taking her son, at which point the officer radios, "I have a mother who is impeding the investigation." Again, her maternal identity is recast as a nuisance and a direct challenge to his authority. At this point, the woman's other son attempts to intervene, and the police officer grabs him, pushes him to the ground, slaps him in the face, and then arrests him. Similar to what happened to Jacqueline Craig, punishment is enacted onto the woman through the treatment of her teenage son, who is also situated as being unworthy of protection and presumably guilty. So in conclusion, my analysis found that aggrieved motherhood provided an opportunity for black mothers to challenge their provisional status when interacting with police. But this possibility was continuously foreclosed upon due to controlling images of black women as aggressive and criminal. Further research should explore how black women resist their inability to be seen as aggrieved mothers in the context of state-sanctioned violence and surveillance.